Sir, you can't just walk in here without proper identification. Marcus Thompson's voice boomed across the pristine marble lobby of Meridian Industries, his hand firmly planted on the chest of a frail elderly man in worn clothes. This is a high-security building, not some public library. The old man, barely 5 feet tall with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, looked up calmly. I understand your concern, young man, but I do have proper identification. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. Marcus scoffed, his security badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Right, and I suppose you're here for the board meeting too. He gestured mockingly at the man's faded cardigan and scuffed shoes. Look, Pops, whatever charity case brought you here, this isn't the place. The soup kitchen is 6 blocks down. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where the most powerful lessons come from the moments we least expect them. Today's story reminds us that respect isn't determined by appearance, and sometimes the most unassuming person in the room holds the greatest power of all. Let's uncover what really happened when a security guard's prejudice collided with a truth that would shake an entire corporation. Marcus Thompson had worked security at Meridian Industries for 3 years. At 28, he took pride in his uniform, his authority, and his ability to keep unwanted visitors out of the 60-story skyscraper that housed one of America's largest technology companies. He'd seen it all: corporate spies, angry customers, homeless individuals seeking shelter. In his mind, he could spot trouble from a mile away. The building's CEO, Jonathan Meridian, had built his empire from nothing. Starting with a small software company in his garage 30 years ago, he'd grown Meridian Industries into a tech giant worth billions. But success hadn't changed his core values. He believed in treating every person with dignity, regardless of their station in life. It was a philosophy he'd learned from his mentor decades ago, though few people knew that story. On this particular Tuesday morning, the lobby buzzed with its usual activity. Employees swiped their key cards, visitors signed in at reception, and delivery personnel wheeled packages across the polished floors. Marcus stood at his post, chest puffed out, surveying his domain with the intensity of a border guard. That's when he spotted him. The old man shuffled through the revolving doors, moving slowly but purposefully toward the elevator bank. His clothes were clean but clearly second-hand. His shoes had seen better decades. To Marcus, he looked like exactly the kind of person who didn't belong in a building where monthly salaries exceeded most people's annual income. "Excuse me, sir." Marcus intercepted the man before he could reach the elevators. "Where do you think you're going?" The elderly gentleman stopped, his weathered hands adjusting his glasses. "Good morning. I'm here for the 10 o'clock meeting on the 42nd floor. Marcus's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "The 42nd floor? That's executive territory, old man. The only meeting up there today is the quarterly board review, and trust me, you're not on the guest list." "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," the old man said gently. "If you could just look at my identification, save it." Marcus stepped closer, using his height and bulk to intimidate. "I don't know what scam you're running, but it ends here. This building has security protocols for a reason. We can't have every vagrant wandering around disrupting business." A small crowd began to gather. Junior executives paused their conversations to watch the confrontation. Receptionists looked up from their desks with concerned expressions, but no one intervened. Marcus was security after all. This was his job. The old man remained remarkably calm despite the growing humiliation. "Son, I've been coming to buildings like this longer than you've been alive. I understand you're doing your job, but if you would just allow me to show you my credentials." "Your credentials?" Marcus's voice dripped with sarcasm. "What credentials could you possibly have? Did you graduate from the University of Park Benches?" The crowd winced at the cruelty of the comment, but still no one spoke up. The old man's face showed hurt for just a moment before returning to its patient expression. "I know how this looks," he said quietly, "but appearances can be deceiving. I'm asking you, as one human being to another, to please look at my identification before making your final decision." Marcus was enjoying the attention now. This was exactly why the company paid him, to keep the riffraff out, to maintain standards. "Listen, Grandpa, I don't care if you've got a golden ticket to Willy Wonka's factory. You're not getting past this desk looking like that." The old man sighed deeply, a sound that seemed to carry decades of disappointment in human nature, but his voice remained steady. "Very well, I respect your authority. Perhaps you could call upstairs and let them know that Henry Patterson is here for the meeting." The name meant nothing to Marcus, confirming his suspicions. "Henry Patterson, huh? Never heard of you. And trust me, I know everyone important who comes through those doors." What Marcus didn't know was that Henry Patterson had indeed been coming through those doors for over 40 years. Not as a visitor, but as a founder. Henry Patterson was one of 3 men who had started Meridian Industries in Jonathan Meridian's garage, though he'd stepped back from active leadership 20 years ago to focus on the company's charitable foundation. The quarterly board meeting wasn't just any meeting. It was the annual review where the board decided on the company's philanthropic direction for the coming year. Henry Patterson wasn't just invited to this meeting. His vote carried more weight than almost anyone else in the room. But dressed in his simple clothes, carrying his worn leather briefcase, he looked nothing like the billionaire he actually was. Henry had always been uncomfortable with displays of wealth. Even after decades of success, he drove a 15-year-old Honda, lived in a modest home, and donated most of his fortune to causes supporting underprivileged youth. As the confrontation continued, Marcus felt increasingly confident in his decision. "Tell you what, Mr. Patterson," he said, making air quotes around the name. "Why don't you head down to the coffee shop on the corner? I hear they're hiring dishwashers. Might be more your speed." The old man's shoulders sagged slightly. In his 8 decades of life, he'd faced discrimination before, but it never got easier. He thought about his grandson, who would be starting college next year, thanks to a scholarship from the Meridian Foundation. He thought about the thousands of young people whose lives had been changed by programs he'd helped fund. And he thought about how this young security guard, despite his cruelty, probably had his own struggles and challenges. "I forgive you," Henry said quietly, surprising everyone within earshot. "You're just doing what you think is right." Marcus was taken aback by the response. He'd expected anger, arguments, maybe even tears. But forgiveness, it was unsettling. "Yeah, well, save the saint act for someone who cares. You've got 30 seconds to leave this building before I call the police." That's when the elevator doors opened. Jonathan Meridian stepped out, flanked by 2 vice presidents. He was running late for the board meeting and walking quickly toward the reception desk to collect his messages. But something made him glance toward the commotion near the security station. His eyes fell on the small crowd gathered around Marcus and the elderly man. For a moment, he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Then recognition hit him like a physical blow. Henry Patterson. His mentor, his friend, his partner in building one of America's most successful companies. The man who had taught him that true leadership meant serving others. The man who had quietly funded the education of thousands of disadvantaged students. Standing there, being humiliated by a security guard who didn't know he was insulting one of the most respected businessmen in the country. Jonathan's face went pale, then flushed with anger and embarrassment. He strode across the lobby with purpose, his Italian leather shoes clicking sharply on the marble floor. The crowd parted instinctively as the CEO approached. "What exactly is going on here?" Jonathan's voice was ice cold, the tone he reserved for the most serious corporate crises. Marcus turned, recognizing his ultimate boss, but not understanding why he looked so angry. "Mr. Meridian, sir. Just doing my job. This vagrant was trying to access the executive floors. I was handling the situation according to protocol." Jonathan looked at Henry, who gave him a small, sad smile and a barely perceptible shake of the head. "Don't make this worse than it needs to be," the gesture seemed to say, but Jonathan was beyond diplomacy. "Marcus, do you know who this man is?" "Some homeless guy claiming to be Henry Patterson, whoever that is," Marcus replied confidently. "Obviously lying. I mean, look at him." The lobby had gone completely silent now. Even the elevator music seemed to pause. Jonathan reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, quickly scrolling to a photo from last year's company retreat. He held it up for Marcus to see. The image showed Jonathan arm in arm with the same elderly man now standing before them, both men wearing expensive suits and genuine smiles. The caption read, "CEO Jonathan Meridian with company co-founder and philanthropist Henry Patterson at the annual Meridian Foundation Gala." Marcus stared at the photo, his confidence evaporating like morning mist. His face went through several shades of red before settling on a sickly pale. That's not possible. He looks like what, Marcus?" Jonathan's voice could have frozen fire. "Like someone who doesn't deserve basic human respect? Like someone whose worth is determined by his clothing?" The security guard's hands began to shake. He looked around desperately as if hoping this was all an elaborate prank. But the expressions on every face in the lobby told him the truth. He had just spent 15 minutes humiliating one of the most powerful men in the company. "Mr. Patterson," Jonathan said, his voice softening as he turned to his mentor, "I cannot begin to apologize for this treatment. This is inexcusable." Henry waved dismissively. "Jonathan, it's quite all right. Young Marcus here was doing what he thought was his job. Perhaps we can use this as a learning opportunity." But Jonathan wasn't ready to let it go. "No, Henry, it's not all right. This represents everything we've said we stand against as a company." He turned back to Marcus, who was now visibly sweating despite the lobby's air conditioning. "Marcus, in your 3 years here, have you ever attended our diversity and inclusion training?" "Yes, sir," Marcus whispered. "Have you ever read our company values statement?" "Yes, sir." "Have you ever heard me speak about treating every person who enters this building with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived status?" Marcus nodded miserably. "Then explain to me how you justified treating Mr. Patterson, or anyone for that matter, the way you just did." The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus opened his mouth several times, but no words came out. Finally, he managed, "I thought I was protecting the company. I thought he didn't belong here." "You thought he didn't belong here," Jonathan repeated slowly. "Based on what? His clothes? His age? The fact that he doesn't fit your image of what success looks like?" Henry stepped forward gently. "If I may, Jonathan." He turned to Marcus with surprising kindness in his eyes. "Son, you made an assumption based on my appearance. I understand that. We all make quick judgments sometimes. But what concerns me isn't your initial reaction. It's how you treated me after I asked you to look at my identification. It's the names you called me. It's the pleasure you seemed to take in humiliating someone you thought couldn't fight back." Marcus felt tears beginning to form. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Let me tell you what I see when I look at you," Henry continued. "I see a young man who probably grew up without much money. I see someone who's worked hard to get where he is, who takes pride in his uniform and his position. I see someone who's probably faced his own share of being judged and dismissed. Am I right?" Marcus nodded, unable to speak. "Then why would you turn around and do the same thing to someone else?" The question pierced through Marcus's defenses like an arrow. He thought about his own childhood, growing up in public housing, wearing second-hand clothes to school, being mocked by kids whose parents had more money. He thought about how it felt to be judged, to be written off, to be treated as less than human because of circumstances beyond his control. "I became the very thing I hated," he whispered, the realization hitting him with devastating clarity. "Recognition is the first step toward redemption," Henry said softly. "But understanding alone isn't enough. What matters now is what you do next." Jonathan watched this exchange with a mixture of amazement and respect. This was why Henry Patterson had been his mentor for so many years. Even in the face of cruel treatment, the man found a way to turn humiliation into education, conflict into compassion. "Marcus," Jonathan said, his voice still firm but no longer harsh, "your employment here is terminated, effective immediately. But before you go, I want you to understand something. You weren't fired because you didn't recognize Mr. Patterson. You were fired because of how you chose to treat another human being." Marcus nodded, his career at Meridian Industries officially over. But as he began to gather his things, Henry spoke again. "Jonathan, might I make a suggestion?" The CEO looked at his mentor curiously. "Of course. Marcus, would you be willing to spend some time volunteering with our foundation? We work with at-risk youth, many of whom have faced the same kind of prejudice you showed me today. Perhaps by working with young people who've been judged and dismissed, you might learn something about the impact of our assumptions." Both Marcus and Jonathan stared at Henry in amazement. Even after everything that had happened, he was offering redemption. "Sir," Marcus stammered, "after what I did to you, why would you want to help me?" Henry smiled, the first genuine smile he'd shown since entering the building. "Because 40 years ago, I was a lot like you. I thought I could judge people by their appearance, their background, their apparent worth. It took a wise man to show me how wrong I was. Maybe it's time I paid that kindness forward." Marcus looked around the lobby, at all the faces watching this incredible scene unfold. He thought about his future, about the kind of man he wanted to be, about the second chance he was being offered by the very person he'd wronged. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice stronger now. "I would be honored to volunteer with your foundation." Jonathan watched this exchange with deep respect for his mentor. This was leadership at its finest, not just punishing wrongdoing, but creating opportunities for growth and redemption. As the crowd began to disperse and normal business resumed, Henry picked up his worn briefcase and straightened his cardigan. He looked no different than he had when he'd first walked through those doors, but everything else had changed. "Shall we head upstairs for that meeting?" Jonathan asked. "In a moment," Henry replied. He turned to the young woman behind the reception desk, who had watched the entire confrontation with wide eyes. "Miss, could you please make sure Marcus receives information about contacting our foundation, and perhaps we could arrange for all security staff to attend a special training session next week?" "Of course, Mr. Patterson," she replied, finally understanding who she'd been watching. As they waited for the elevator, Jonathan shook his head in wonder. "Henry, how do you do it? How do you find forgiveness so quickly?" The old man was quiet for a moment, watching Marcus gather his belongings and speak quietly with the other security guards, some of whom were patting his shoulder supportively. "You know, Jonathan, I've learned that anger is like holding a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You're the one who gets burned. That young man's prejudice hurt me, yes, but my anger would have hurt me more, and it wouldn't have taught him anything valuable." The elevator arrived, and as they stepped inside, Henry continued. "Besides, every person deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment. Marcus showed me his worst today, but I have a feeling his best is yet to come." 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood before a group of inner-city teenagers, sharing his story. He spoke honestly about his prejudices, his mistakes, and the day that changed his life. He worked full-time for the Patterson Foundation now, developing programs to help young people overcome the same biases that had nearly destroyed his own future. Henry Patterson attended that presentation, sitting quietly in the back row. When Marcus finished speaking, the teenagers gave him a standing ovation. But the moment that mattered most came afterward, when a shy young girl approached Marcus to thank him for his honesty. "Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, "sometimes people look at me and think I'm just another poor kid who won't amount to anything. But you've shown me that what they think doesn't matter. What matters is what I think about myself and how I treat other people." Marcus looked across the room at Henry, who nodded approvingly. In that moment, Marcus understood that his humiliation in the Meridian Industries lobby hadn't been the end of his story. It had been the beginning of his redemption. The security badge he'd once worn with such pride had been replaced by something far more valuable, the knowledge that true security comes not from keeping people out, but from inviting them in. True strength isn't about wielding power over others, but about lifting others up. And sometimes the most profound lessons come from the people we least expect to teach them. In a world that often judges by appearances, Henry Patterson's quiet dignity reminds us that respect isn't earned through expensive clothes or impressive titles. It's earned through our actions, our compassion, and our willingness to see the humanity in every person we meet. Marcus Thompson learned that lesson the hard way, but he learned it well. And in learning it, he discovered that sometimes our greatest failures can become our most powerful tools for helping others succeed. The next time you see someone who doesn't fit your image of success, remember Henry Patterson. Remember that the most unassuming person in the room might be the one with the most to teach you. And remember that how we treat others, especially those who seem to have less power than us, reveals everything about who we truly are, because in the end, we're all just human beings trying to make our way in the world, and we all deserve to be treated with dignity, respect, and kindness, regardless of how we're dressed or where we come from. That's the lesson of grateful stories. That's the power of second chances, and that's the truth that can change everything if we're brave enough to embrace it.